Hello, I've got your energy stories for the fourth week of March 2022. First, a correction and thank you to Polly Shaw of Plus Power. Last week I commented that the Massachusetts legislature had passed H 4515, an act advancing offshore wind and clean energy, pushing the state's offshore wind target from 4,000 to 5,600 megawatts while promoting grid modernization activities and energy storage. I incorrectly stated that bill now awaits Governor Charlie Baker's signature. Well, that's not so. The bill only passed the House and then was replaced by Senate Bill 4524, which currently sits in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. Thank you, Polly. Now let's get the bad news out of the way. The International Energy Agency reported recently that global CO2 emissions rose 6% in 2021 to 36.3 billion tons, a new record, as the world economy bounced back from COVID, leaning heavily on coal, responsible for 40% of the increased emissions, to drive growth. This despite the fact that renewables also registered record growth, notching over 8,000 terawatt hours, up 500 terawatt hours from the prior year. In the wake of that unfolding tragedy in the Ukraine and the energy shadow that it casts over Europe, Germany and Norway signed a joint agreement to cooperate in promoting large-scale hydrogen exports from Norway to Germany. The goal is to cut dependence on energy imports from Russia by building out a European hydrogen-focused infrastructure, which may involve both green hydrogen, perhaps blue for a little while, and derivatives such as ammonia. The two nations will undertake a feasibility study on the development of a green H2 pipeline. Now, let's move on to somewhat lighter stuff. The Mid-Atlantic offshore wind grid may be starting to take shape, as 13 developers submitted 80 transmission projects delivering electricity from offshore wind to New Jersey. The bids covered everything from upgrades to power lines on land, beach crossings, and infrastructure linking the offshore projects to the mainland. These submissions will now be reviewed by the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities and the Mid-Atlantic grid operator, PJM. New Jersey has a goal of 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. So this piece of the equation is critical and quite costly as well, with estimated price tag running somewhere between $15 and $20 billion. The first three offshore projects went their own way, building their own hub and spoke direct connections to the mainland. But long term, the experience from the North Sea shows that this is both costly and more difficult with respect to integration into mainland grids. So better to build an offshore grid that more efficiently ties in. Hence the New Jersey Board's effort to work with PJM in developing an integrated approach and a bidding process. The board expects to render decisions by October of this year. If you want a great house, you got to build a solid foundation. Sticking with wind, the ZEBRA, Zero Waste Blade Research, that acronym is a reach, Consortium just announced the first prototype of its 100% recyclable thermoplastic wind turbine blade. LM Wind Power, a GE subsidiary, got the job done creating a 62-meter blade using a third party's thermoplastic resin with recyclable properties, combined with high-performance glass from Owens Corning. Not to diss Indiana, but it's not exactly the heartland of renewables, so when Indiana Michigan Power comes out with a request for 800 megawatts of wind and 500 megawatts of solar, that tells you the renewable energy transition is pretty much everywhere. The utility expects some contracted renewables to be commissioned as early as the end of 2024, with all 1,300 megawatts running as early as the end of 2025. Solar projects within Indiana or Michigan and wind from Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio are expected. A second RFP is also in the offing, eyeing 800 megawatts of solar, 60 megawatts of batteries, and 1,000 megawatts of gas peakers to meet system requirements by 2028. That's the year the utility plans to retire its coal-fired Rockport facility. And finally, how about some juice with your coffee? Volvo and Starbucks plan to develop a public EV charging network at Starbucks locations starting this summer. There'll be 60 DC charge point chargers going in at 15 Starbucks locations sprinkled every 100 miles or so along a 1,350-mile route from Denver to Seattle, where Starbucks headquarters is located. US Volvo drivers can use the ChargePoint app, and drivers can charge at Starbucks for free or at preferential rates. Other non-Volvo drivers will pay an as yet to be determined charging fee. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.